right. Now, let's go ahead and get started. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping first. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, you're going to be seeing my picture here. And right below, there's a button for chat. And if you want to click on that button, you can open up the chat window. And down at the very bottom, there's a little blue drop down. And you can share your chat message with all panelists and attendees. And that makes sure that I'll see your message and all the other people in the webinar will see your message too. So that's a great way to communicate with everyone. And I'm going to be asking some questions throughout the event. So if you want to use that to communicate with me, that'd be great. If you have a very specific, more technical question or something you want me to address during our Q&A period at the end, then please feel free to use the Q&A button, which is also right down below here. All right, excellent. So I wanted to start out this evening by finding out everyone, getting the mood of the room and finding out what everyone's feelings about sparkling sake are. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. And if you can see that, go ahead and let me know how you enjoy sparkling sake, if it's one of your favorite things in the world or if it's not your favorite. I want to get a sense for how much convincing I have to do tonight to get people loving sparkling sake. All right. Going to let a few more people chime in on the poll. Excellent. Let's see here. Okay, I have good news. No one has said yuck so far. That's very encouraging for all our attendees. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look and see what we got here. Share results. Okay, so if you can see that, that is our results for the poll tonight. The majority of you like sparkling sake quite a bit, and that is really great. I think that's indicative of how far sparkling sake has come since a few years ago. We're going to talk about that quite a bit tonight. So if you'll let me, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start sharing a PowerPoint with you. And we're going to go through and look at what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's go ahead and share the screen. Okay. All right, I hope you can all see that. That's our slideshow for tonight. Now, what are we going to talk about in this webinar this evening? Well, the first thing I want to do is introduce Hakkaisan Sake Brewery. They're the makers of Hakkaisan AWA, which is the sake we're going to primarily focus on tonight. And I wanted to introduce them just a little bit so you get a sense for Hakkaisan Brewery. Then I wanted to talk about the term AWA and the Japan AWA Association. This is a group of breweries in Japan that have come together to promote and really encourage production of premium sparkling sake. So I wanted to introduce you to that group right at the beginning, because then we're going to talk about the origin of bubbles in alcohol and how we got here in the first place. And then we're going to look at how sparkling sake, particularly the AWA, is made compared to champagne. And we're going to look at French champagne in particular and go through step by step, side by side, and see where the overlap is and where the differences are in producing sparkling wine champagne versus sparkling sake Hakkaisan AWA. So that's going to be really interesting. Then I'm going to talk a bit about storage and service and what glasses you can use, how you can keep sparkling sake a little bit longer. Then we're going to go through some food pairings, and we have a special offer tonight for those of you in New York City. That'll be interesting at the end, and then we're going to leave time for Q&A at the end. I am managing the webinar all by myself tonight, so if I don't see your question, be sure to hold it for the Q&A session as well. If you really want me to see your question, be sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom, and that'll pop in, and I'll be sure to look at that during our Q&A session. So before we go any further, I wanted to open our first bottle of sparkling, and I have the Hakkaisan AWA right here. So this is we're going to talk about this quite a bit tonight, but this is our bottle of sparkling. And I have the 360 ml. Some of you might have the 720 ml size. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to open this as a way to start off our evening. And if you have a bottle of sparkling at home, please feel free to do that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of instruction about how to open this. You'll see that there's a foil cover. There's a little tab here to pull the foil cover off. I just sometimes take the whole foil off. And then you're going to notice underneath that, there's a cage, a metal cage, and a cork. So this is sealed with a traditional cork, and it's under pressure. The amount of pressure in here, as we'll talk about later, is about 5 atmospheres of pressure. That's very similar to what you would have in a champagne. Now, the main thing holding everything together here is this metal cage. And there's a little tab here that you can pull down and then begin to untwist, and that will release the pressure on the metal cage. And it's important to note that you want to have everything secured before you start to undo this metal twist. The moment you do, this could come flying out. So we really have to talk about safety first. One thing that I sometimes do if I do not know how a bottle was handled before I got to it, sometimes bottles of sparkling sake are handed to you and you don't know if someone just shook it up or if they were riding around in a car or whatever. So if you're not sure how the bottle was handled, you want to treat it with extra caution because any agitation can boost up the pressure. One thing that you can do is you can take a clean dish towel and you can lay it over the top like this. If you're unsure or a little bit nervous, this towel can act as a little bit of a catch-all if the cork comes out unexpectedly. So that's one thing you can do for a little bit of a safety measure. You want to keep pressure, downward pressure on the cork whenever you go to undo this metal cage. I actually like to put it against a table and unscrew that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to unscrew the cork, unscrew this metal cage rather, and once that's loose, there is no more security on that. So you can begin to turn the cork and you should feel an upward pressure. And you do not want a big loud pop. That is something we do not want. We want a very gentle hiss. We're going to see if we can get that here. Oh, that was not too bad. And you may notice a little bit of mist coming out, and that's the CO2 being released. That level of noise or softer is really what you want. A loud, obnoxious pop with sake flying everywhere is something that we really want to avoid, although a lot of people associate that with champagne and celebration, but it is such a waste of really good sparkling sake. So I've got my bottle open. So before things go any further, I'm going to pour myself a little glass here. And I have so many samples of glasses I'm going to show you, but I'm going to pick this one. This is a champagne coupe, very standard issue champagne coupe, saucer style champagne glass. And I'm going to pour my sparkling sake in here. All right. So I want to say kanpai to everybody. Cheers. And thank you all so much for coming. So I'm sorry, I just realized I was sharing my screen. If some of you couldn't see me opening the bottle, I'm going to do another one when we get to the storage section. I'm really sorry about that. But this was the cork in the cage. And we're going to go through that one more time if you didn't get it open. But for now, we're going to do our cheers, kanpai, and thank you all for joining us. Great. All right. Here we go. All right. Now, let's start out by talking just a little bit about Hakkaisan while we're sipping on our sparkling. Hakkaisan is located in Niigata Prefecture, and you can see Niigata here on the slide. This is where we're located. It's about 90 minutes by bullet train from Tokyo. And Hakkaisan is primarily a sake brewery, but they also make beer and they also make shochu. But they're primarily known for making some of the best sake in Japan. Now, the meaning of this word Hakkaisan, the brand name, actually means 8 peaks. And this mountain that you see here is Hakkaisan Mountain. And the way we translate that in English is 8-peaked mountain. And if you can't see the 8 peaks on that mountain, I'm going to show you right now. Okay, those are the 8 peaks. This brewery is this mountain is very, very close to our brewery. And the reason that the brand is named after this mountain is not just because how close the mountain is to the brewery, but also our water source to make all of our sake, including the sparkling AWA, is at the base of this mountain. Now, if you think about the Niigata region in Japan, one thing it's really well known for besides sake is snow. And this is the winter view of that same mountain, of Hakkaisan Mountain. And you can see how heavy the snow is. This is a picture of the Hakkaisan guest house in January, and it is a very, very heavy, thick snow. So this snow comes from the cold winds of Siberia over the Sea of Japan, and it dumps lots of snow in this region. That's one of the primary indicators of this region is the snowfall. And this snow melts in the spring and supplies wonderful amounts of very low, soft water, low minerality, soft water. And that water is one of the primary drivers of the identity of a lot of the Niigata sakes, but especially Hakkaisan. So this is the sake that we're all tasting tonight. I'm going to go through all these stats and the tasting notes and all that stuff in a little bit. But if you have opened your AWA, this is what we're going to be focusing on tonight. And let's actually look at that term AWA. What does that mean? So the word AWA in Japanese means foam, bubble, or even can mean like froth. And it's a term that was adopted to represent sparkling sake. And there is an association in Japan called the Japan AWA Association, Awazake Association. And I wanted to introduce them to you. They haven't been around very long. Hakkaisan was one of the founding members of the Japan Awazake Association. And I wanted to go over what their mission is, what they're doing, and then we're going to compare that to what has evolved in France with sparkling wine. So just remember that word awa, that means bubble or foam. So the Awazake Association in Japan has the registered trademark of Awazake in Japan. And they have 3 goals to their organization. One is to ensure that quality of any associated sparkling sake is high. They want to do continuing education among the breweries to make sure that knowledge is shared and always striving for the best sparkling sake that can be made. And of course, they want to do promotion and marketing, and they want to encourage the growth of premium sparkling sake. So I mentioned this is a relatively recent association, and it all started back in February 2016. The AWA Association was established, and 9 breweries were involved in the founding of the Awazake Association, including Hakkaisan. So our brewery that makes this Hakkaisan AWA, we were one of the founding breweries for the Awazake Association. In 2017, in March, they developed a certification process for breweries. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but it's a certain number of things that a brewery needs to do in order to qualify as a certified provider of this Japan Awazake product. The first certification was awarded in April of 2017, and as of December 2019, there's over 25 member breweries that are in this association. Now let's look at the product standard for an Awazake product. There's some rules and regulations, just like we have in the world of champagne, about how you need to make the product in order to qualify for this association. The first one is that junmai styles only are allowed. That means that no added alcohol can be added to any of the sparkling sakes. The rice is required to be 100% Japan domestically grown rice. The CO2 in any of the sparkling products can only come from natural fermentation. So CO2 injection, like, when you're making soda, seltzer, or Coca-Cola, you put those bubbles in by force, that's not allowed with any of the AWA Sake Association sakes. When the sake is poured, it must be clear, transparent, and bubbles must form when poured. So there are some sparkling sakes that are cloudy in nature that are not clear. This product we have today, the Hakkaisan AWA, and all the AWA certified products with the AWA Association are clear, transparent, and form bubbles when poured. The alcohol content has to be 10% or more, and the pressure in the bottle must be 3.5 bars or more when the bottle's at 20 degrees Celsius. That's about 3.5 atmospheres of pressure. I mentioned a moment ago when we opened this sparkling that the pressure for this one is about 5 atmospheres of pressure. And 1 atmosphere, I think, is about 14 pounds of pressure. So those are the requirements for having a product be accepted as an official AWA Sake Association sparkling sake. Now, for a brewery to get membership in the AWA Association, they're going to come and inspect the brewing process and the raw materials that you're using to make sure they comply with what we just looked at. They're going to inspect the finished product to make sure it complies with all the items we just looked at. If you pass, you're going to be awarded a certificate for your brewery that you're a certified provider of this style of sake. And then you're going to get these special stickers. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is covered a little bit with the back label. But there's this peeking yellow sticker sticking up here. This is actually the Japanese AWA Sake Association holograph sticker. And you can see on the slide that there's a QR code, there's a barcode, there's a serial number, and these stickers are given to the breweries that are certified to produce AWA Sake Association products. And you're going to notice in Japan that those yellow stickers are on any products that are produced to these standards. And these are the AWA Sake Association breweries. This is a subset of the current listing of breweries, and you'll see Hakkaisan is there in the second row as one of the original breweries to join this association. So one of the reasons that I thought that this was important, was to show you that there's a real push since 2016 to develop a premium sparkling product. For a long time in Japan, sparkling sake was viewed as something less luxury, not elegant, usually produced with very low alcohol, usually produced with CO2 injection. So almost like making a soda, they would force the bubbles in, excuse me. And it was not a high prestige product. And when the Olympics were being discussed about coming to Tokyo, which have been moved to next year because of COVID, but when they were scheduled for this summer, there was talk among the breweries that they wanted to create a premium sparkling product that could be used as a toast or a kanpai sake, at the Olympic Games, at the opening ceremony or the closing ceremony or any of the official events connected to the Olympics. And it makes perfect sense that you want to have a product that represents the country. So this AWA Sake Association was formed, and that was the impetus for wanting to create a premium sparkling sake. And we've all been the beneficiaries of that. And now we've seen this growing movement for more premium styles of sparkling sake. Cheers. Now, let's see. All right. So let's look at the whole history a little bit of where bubbles come from in sake. Why do we have bubbles in some alcohol? There's a long history of carbonation happening in alcohol. But as far as getting bubbles into wine, the first person to really document a process for making that happen reliably was an English scientist in 1662. He published a document on getting sparkles or bubble into wine, and his name was Christopher Merritt. Around the same time, there's a very famous French monk that everyone in the Champagne world knows about, Dom Pérignon, and he is often associated with the tinkering and development of methods for getting bubbles in in a wine. Now, an interesting thing that I learned was that when they were first wrestling with bubbles in wine, it was not to get them in there, it was to get them out of there. Having bubbles in wine was viewed as a flaw and something that they wanted to avoid. It could make bottles and casks explode, and it wasn't the preferred way of drinking wine. So for a while, they were trying to figure out what was causing these bubbles, not to get them in, but to get them out. One thing that's interesting that happened is that the French were anxious to sell their wines to other countries and other places, and they would often quickly put the wine into barrels and ship it off to England. And maybe the fermentation wasn't quite completed when they did that. And it would arrive in England and they would tap the keg and it would come out sparkling. Now, the British have more of a history with beer and they really enjoy sparkling alcohol, perhaps more than the French did originally. So they came to really enjoy this style that was kind of surreptitiously happening. And they found out that this is a style that could be really enjoyed. Over the next decades, sparkling wine, especially from Champagne, the Champagne region, evolved into a luxury item. It was quite rare and quite costly to produce. It began being enjoyed by royalty and by the wealthy classes, and it soon developed an association with celebration and with good times, good things happening, and it became a special occasion bottle. As sparkling wine, as champagne became a little bit more affordable, people who weren't super wealthy or weren't royalty could afford a bottle of sparkling wine or a bottle of champagne on a special occasion. So it very much became associated with special occasions and celebration. Now, there's a very well-known tradition in the world of sports that race car drivers spray champagne everywhere when they win their race. And I actually learned that there was a very specific mid-20th century event that happened that led to this very interesting way of enjoying a celebration with sparkling wine. In 1966, there was a winner of the Le Mans motor race named Joe Siffert. And since the 1930s, there had been a tradition of giving the winners of these races bottles of champagne. And normally they would just sit on the platform with them and they would drink them later. And it was just a gift along with the award. And one year, it was in 1966, it was out in the sun and one of the champagne bottles just uncorked itself and just spewed champagne into the air. And everyone was like, oh my God, what just happened? Well, the very next year at the same race, there's kind of a jokester guy who won, Dan Gurney, and he opened the champagne and sprayed everybody on purpose the next year. And then the rest is history, as they say. This was just the way that this particular celebration method for racing evolved. I thought that was very, very interesting. So just a quick word about champagne as we're going to go now compare champagne and AWA sparkling sake. So champagne is a sparkling wine that must come from the Champagne region in France, and you see that here on the slide. This is what's called a geographical indication, where the product, in order to be called champagne, must come from this region. And there's a few other rules, such as the grapes that are used. The grapes that are primarily used with champagne are 3 varieties: Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Meunier. If a sparkling wine comes from another part of the world, it generally has a different name, although some people refer to champagne as a general term for all sparkling wine, but as we know, it must come from the Champagne region. Cava's from Spain, Prosecco's from Italy, Sekt is from Germany, and American sparkling wines are just called sparkling wine. Now, let's look at champagne versus sparkling sake. And this is really the champagne method in two different iterations. So we're going to look at the champagne method for champagne from France, and we're going to look at the traditional method, or this so-called champagne method, for sparkling sake. So the raw material preparation, what do we need to do to get things started? Well, for champagne, there's those primarily 3 grape varieties that I just mentioned. The grapes must be picked by hand and must be picked in clusters. This is a regulation in the Champagne region. The grapes are then pressed, and there's a lot of regulation around the pressing of the champagne grapes as well. Out of 4,000 kilograms of grapes, you can only get 2,550 liters of juice. And that juice that comes out is split into 2 groups. The first 2,500 liters is known as the cuvée. That's like the premier cut of the pressing. And then the last 500 is known as the taillé, and that is less desirable. Now, for AWA sake, the preparation of the raw materials is very similar to what we would do for any premium still sake. The rice is all domestically grown. It must be grated before the sake is made. The rice in our case is milled to 50%, so that's a process that happens. And the rice is then washed, steamed, and soaked, and then we make koji. Koji is a type of molded rice that we use to break down starch into sugar. So these are all the preparation steps for making a sparkling sake. I just saw a question in the chat, is it always milled to 50% or could it be at a higher level? Well, for the rice milling, the example we have here with the Hakkaisan AWA, this is polished to 50%, which is a super premium level. You can go smaller than that, or you can have it a little more robust. There's no regulation as far as the AWA association as to what the milling rate has to be. In our case, we wanted to have a super premium grade, so it is 50%. Now, next, after we have the raw materials prepped, we have the primary fermentation, and this is where we actually make the alcohol. For champagne, we have the grape juice, which is known as must, and we add yeast to that, and that undergoes simple alcoholic fermentation, one-step fermentation. There is sugar in the grape juice, the yeast eats the sugar and gives off alcohol. There's an optional step of malolactic fermentation. This is the additional breakdown of malic acid into lactic acid by bacteria that is in the wine as well. That is an optional step. So some people want malolactic fermentation to impart more lactic or buttery notes into the champagne, but it's not required. At the end of that fermentation process, you have a still wine, a flat wine. For the AWA, we take rice, water, yeast, and that koji rice, and we do a process of fermentation that's called multiple parallel fermentation. All that means is that we take the starch of the rice, the starch gets broken down into sugar, and we use the enzymes from koji rice to do that. And then we have the sugar, and then the yeast is there to eat the sugar, and then we get the alcohol. So we have starch to sugar, sugar to alcohol. So that's a 2-step fermentation process. And what's unique about this is that the starch to sugar and sugar to alcohol are happening in the same tank at the same time. That's unique in the world of alcohol, and that's how we get sake. After the alcohol is produced, we do a pressing step. We separate the unfermented rice from the alcohol, and then we have premium still sake. So now we're at the same stage in both of these processes. We have our wine completed, our champagne wine completed, and we have our still premium sparkling sake completed. The next step is to prep the secondary fermentation. And this step is called tirage. And we're going to add something to both styles to kick off that secondary fermentation. In the world of champagne, we add what's called liqueur de tirage. And this is a liquid, it's a mixture of wine, yeast, and sugar that gets added to the still wine that's in the bottle, and then it's sealed up. In the world of sake, we also add something to the bottle. So we put our premium premium sake in the bottle, and we need to add something to kick off that secondary fermentation. And with sparkling sake, we add what's called moromi mash. This is the live fermentation mash, and that has rice, water, yeast, and koji in it. So we take from another batch, we take some live fermentation mash, a little bit goes into the bottle, and that gets sealed up. So now, when that's done, we have our secondary fermentation happening in the bottle. So for champagne, usually the secondary fermentation can last for a long time. They call this sitting on the lees. The lees are the yeast and the sediment that's in there. And for sparkling sake, we do not do generally aging as a standard practice. So our process, our standard process for creating the secondary fermentation for the Hakkaisan AWA is 2 months, only 2 months. The general minimum for the champagne is 15 months. So this is a much different process at this stage. What's happening during the secondary fermentation is that the bubbles that are created, the carbon dioxide, is getting trapped in the bottle and in the liquid. So the next step is called riddling. And this is a slow inversion of the bottle. And this is going to be very similar between the champagne and the sparkling sake. In this slide that you see here, you see the bottle on its side with a red line there. That line indicates, that red dot indicates the dead yeast and the sediment that's in the bottle. And when it's on its side, the sake can sit on that, and the yeast is eventually going to die and fall down. And then over the course of those 2 months, what we're going to do with the sparkling sake is we're going to riddle the bottles. That means they're going to get turned every so often, and then they're going to end up upside down. And all the dead yeast, you see how the sediment slowly goes to the neck. All the dead yeast is going to be trapped in the neck. And that is allowing us to access that. And here you can see a photo of the plug, or the dead yeast and sediment that's in the neck. The next step is disgorgement. And again, this is going to be very similar between champagne and sparkling sake, where the bottles are inverted, they usually get chilled, and then they're opened quickly, and the pressure that's built up is going to force that plug out. This allows us to make a clear product. So getting the sediment out in this way allows us to create a clear final product. After the sparkling sake is disgorged, in the champagne world, we do something called dosage. And dosage is basically adding sugar to the final product to kind of balance out the acidity and the flavors. And there's all these different levels depending on how many grams per liter you add. You can add different levels of sweetness back in by adding sugar. But in the world of sake, we do not do that. No dosage. This is actually quite rare in the world of champagne, that you have what's known as a Brut Zero or natural champagne with absolutely no sugar added. So all the sweetness in the sparkling sake that we're enjoying tonight comes from the rice starch alone. So the conversion of starch into sugar is our only source of sugar for sparkling sake. No added sugars allowed. So there's no what we call dosage for sparkling sake. This is for premium sparkling sake. After that, we do corking, and we're going to do the cage and the foil, and all the final presentation gets done. And then you have a final product. So that is how we get, both for champagne and for sparkling sake, premium sparkling sake. That was a little bit of an overview of the production process. Now we're going to look at service and storage. You want to keep your sparkling sake stored in a chilled area. And I demonstrated before how to open a bottle, but I'm going to do that one more time so you guys can all see it. So I just stopped my screen sharing. Can you see my full screen again? Can you see, can someone let me know in the chat if you can see my full screen? No, not yet. Not yet. Okay. Let's just stop that. How about that? There we go. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open another bottle so you can all see. And what I'm doing is I'm taking off the foil. And here's the cage we talked about. And you can see this little tab right here. You want to pull that tab down. And then that will allow you to twist to undo the cage that's holding down the cork, resisting that pressure. So again, the moment you begin to loosen this metal, you want to have downward pressure on the bottle cork. So I'm just going to do that down here just a little bit. Okay, so now I've undone the cork and I'm gonna begin to twist the bottle. You get the most pressure and you can slowly feel the cork coming up little by little. And then you wanna get a little pop like that. And I was pushing down as it was coming up, and that allows you a little bit of control over the cork coming out. So that's the process for opening. And as I mentioned before, if you're unsure, you can always put a towel over what you're doing, and that would catch it if the cork were to fly off. All right, well, that deserves another kampai, so I'm gonna pour some in the glass. Cheers, everyone. Kampai. All right. Let's go back to our presentation, and I'm gonna show you what glasses we can use to serve sparkling sake. Well, I have a few examples here. The first one I showed you is the coupe, and this is a low bowl, a very standard coupe. I have a classic pressed glass coupe, very affordable. I also have a lead crystal coupe as well. Now, what has become very popular since the 80s into the 90s is a champagne flute. And these are tall, skinny glasses, and this is a crystal champagne flute. I also have a Japanese style champagne flute, tall, skinny. Now, the theory behind these champagne flutes is that because there's less surface area, you're going to release less bubbles. And I don't really know if that's scientifically proven or not. I think it really comes down to preference. Now, the third option you can use for enjoying your sparkling wine, your sparkling sake, is a wine glass. And some people may think like, oh, that's heresy. You can't use a wine glass. You need a special glass for enjoying sparkling. And it's not true. Lots of wine professionals use standard wine glasses to enjoy their sparkling. And the reason for that is that you can really enjoy the color and you can enjoy the aroma as well. So really getting in there, that allows you to smell very, very well and access the sparkling sake very well. So there's no shame at all in asking for a wine glass when you're enjoying a sparkling sake. But those are pretty much the three standard types of glasses that would be used for enjoying a sparkling sake. Now, I often get asked, how can I keep the bubbles in my sparkling sake after I've opened it? And there's a few tricks that I have. The first one is keeping the bottle very, very cold, very well chilled. The colder the bottle is, the less of the CO2 that can get out of the liquid. So if the bottle gets closer and closer to room temperature, more of the bubbles can get out more quickly. So keeping the sake well chilled after opening is a great way to help preserve those bubbles. The other thing is that you want to use a high quality stopper. And I really have tested them all, and I really enjoy this style of stopper that you see on the slide that has a clip that comes down and really secures itself underneath. So this is the style I really recommend. And the last thing is to agitate and move the bottle as little as possible. I've been out on the road with pouring sake at different restaurants and driving from place to place. And as the bottle gets jostled throughout the day, more and more of that CO2 comes out. And by the end of the day, my sake was unfortunately flat. The less you can move the bottle and keep it perfectly still, the longer those bubbles are going to last. So those are my three tricks for keeping more and more of the sparkling qualities in there. Now, I want to look now at the stats for the particular sparkling sake that we are tasting tonight. So the alcohol percentage for Hakkaisan AWA is 13%. And the sake meter value, that's a measurement of how sweet or dry the sake is. -5 indicates a gentle, lighter sweetness. The scale runs from about -5 to +10 generally in that range. So plus numbers tend to be drier and negative numbers below 0 indicate increasing levels of sweetness generally. So this indicates a gentle sweetness. The acidity is 1.4. That's kind of middle of the road for the acidity. The rice used to make the koji is Yamada Nishiki, which is a very premium, the king of sake rice. And then for the brewing rice, or for the starch component, we have 3 different types of sake rice: Gohyaku Mangoku, Miyama Nishiki, and some more Yamada Nishiki. And that rice is polished to 50% remaining. So it's a very luxurious treatment of the rice. Now let's move on to the flavor profile for this Awa sparkling sake from Hakkaisan. So if you have some in your wine glass or in your coupe, let's go ahead and give it a smell and a taste. Now you may notice some very gentle melon aromas. I find that comes across clearly for me on the nose. And when you taste the sake, you're going to notice a gentle sweetness on the palate. That's more upfront, I find. The body is very soft, and the bubble texture on the palate is very, very fine. So the bubble size, if you see it in the glass, if you look at the glass and see the bubbles going up in the glass, they're very, very small and very fine. And that small size bubble is something that is really much more prevalent in the world of secondary fermentation in the bottle. And the finish is a wonderful aspect of this sake as well. It's dry, clean, and really, really crisp. So I wanted to talk about some food pairing ideas now. The first one is really easy. How about no food at all? That's how I've been enjoying it so far. Having Hakkaisan Awa, or sparkling sake, as an aperitif is a wonderful way to get things started when you're going for a meal or in a restaurant. The definition of aperitif is an alcoholic drink taken before the meal to stimulate the appetite. And I think that is pretty fantastic, and that's something that we can use Hakkaisan Awa for sure to do. So as an aperitif, it's kind of a no-brainer to break out a really delicious premium sparkling sake. Another pairing idea that I really love is oysters and raw bar. So oysters are a wonderful pairing with sparkling, especially sparkling sake. I call it umami heaven, and a lot of people who are into champagne and sparkling wine say that sparkling wines are an ideal pairing with oysters, but they've never had sparkling sake and oysters. Sake has a secret weapon that wine does not have, and that is amino acids and umami. So there's little bits of protein that you get in rice that convert to amino acids, and this converts to the sensation of umami, or that savory deliciousness on our palate. Sake is going to have 7 to 10 times the amino acid profile of wine. So that's why savory umami-driven foods are always a natural pairing with sake. And oysters are a home run, no-fail magic pairing for me with sparkling sake. Even though there's just a hint of sweetness up front, the dry finish and the little bit of a savory note you get on the end is a magic pairing with oysters. So I recommend trying oyster on the half shell with the sparkling sake. And also that extends to any other raw bar item. So if you have crab legs or shrimp or any other of those shellfish or seafood you're going to get on the raw bar at a restaurant, sparkling sake is a wonderful pairing with all of those. Now we're going to take a little detour, and the next pairing idea I actually have is prosciutto di Parma. So this is something I love, and I have a little sample of it here. So we're going to do a live taste test. So I'm going to take a little bit of the prosciutto. That's salty, meaty, and now we're going to try and pair it with the sparkling. Wonderful. There's a great balance to that saltiness and the umami you get in the prosciutto that balances so well with the sparkling sake. So this is a wonderful way to balance out those salty flavors. The next pairing idea is actually cheese. I think cheese in general would pair really well with sparkling sake, with Hakkaisan Awa, but I brought a sample of Parmigiano Reggiano, which is one of my favorite cheeses. And this is really an umami bomb. There's a high concentration of umami in Parmesan, and I'm going to take a little taste of some Parmesan. Very nutty, a little bit earthy, salty. That is A+, fantastic. The umami in the sake is really drawn out, even though it's subtle umami. This is not an earthy sake. This is not like an umami bomb sake, but there are traces of that savory rice flavor, especially on the finish of this sake, and it pairs beautifully with this cheese. That was an A-plus pairing. Another thing that I really love is salads. If you've ever had a salad and they've put little pieces of citrus or grapes or melon in your salad, that's a flavor combination that I really love. And I think you can mimic that and connect with that when you use sparkling sake to pair with a salad. It's a wonderful, wonderful pairing, a light, fresh, crisp salad. The sparkling sake brings in that melon note, that little bit of a fruity note, and a lot of those vinaigrettes are made with sparkling wine sometimes, so you can, there's a wonderful marriage that can happen there. Moving on to dessert, the first thing I wanted to recommend is how about a sorbet float? And I actually have, okay, I had it sitting in a cold location. I have some homemade sorbet. This is strawberry sorbet that I made. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pour a little bit of sparkling AWA and make a sorbet float. Ooh, oh my gosh, this looks good. Okay, so we've got sparkling AWA, and I'm gonna stop my share for a second. But here you can see this. This is what I've just made. And we're gonna give this a little taste and see how this is. Ooh. Mmm. Wow, guys, that's pretty good. I'm gonna take a sip. Mmm. So the sparkling sake adds acidity, surprisingly. It brings out more of the acidity to kind of balance that sweetness, and you get all the texture of the bubbles on your tongue. Really fun. This is very, very good and fun. I've never actually had this before. That's really good. Very, very fun. Okay, let's share our screen again. All right. Now, another dessert item you can pair is something like a fruit tart. And this would pair beautifully as well. A lot of champagnes are not paired traditionally with dessert because they tend to have very high acidity. And the acidity really doesn't marry too well with things that are sweet. But this Hakkaisan AWA has a lower acidity and a very balanced overall profile when it comes to sweetness. So it's a wonderful thing to bring in with desserts. We just had it with the sorbet, and now we had it with the fruit tart. This is a wonderful, wonderful pairing as well. Now, for those of you that are in the New York City area, I apologize if you're phoning in from elsewhere. We're actually doing a promotion with Hakkaisan AWA. There is a little promotion that's been set up. It's happening on September 18th, 19th, and 20th. And again, unfortunately, this is for New York City folks only. But there's a program called Sake Meets Chefs to Go. This is sponsored by Sake Discoveries and by Panya, which is a Japanese pastry shop here in the city. And they've created a pairing with our sparkling sake. They've made an iburigako cream cheese tart. Now, we talked a lot about savory things and we talked about sweet things. And I think this kind of marries those two ideas. So we have a tart, but inside the tart, we have cream cheese and iburigako. Iburigako is a smoked daikon pickle. So this is going to be a savory tart. This was created by Chef Ellie, who's one of the pastry chefs at Panya here in New York City. And because we've had challenges eating out at restaurants, we wanted to create an experience that would be to go. So you can create this experience at home by ordering this set and picking it up at a New York City location. I actually have the set here, and I'm going to stop my sharing. All right, So this is the set right here. All right, so you get the bottle of sake, you get a bottle of Hakkaisan, and you get the cream cheese tart. And I'm going to taste that right now and do the pairing. Okay, so this is what the tart looks like. So it's got some shiso on top, it's got cream cheese, and it has a little bit of the daikon pickles in there. And this again is going to be a savory pairing. It may look like a dessert, but it is a savory pairing. I'm going to take a little bit of this, get some shiso. All right, here we go. Itadakimasu. Mmm. Mmm, very good. So the unique ingredient in this tart is that smoked daikon pickle. It gives a little bit of a smoky flavor. The creaminess from the cream cheese gets really well balanced from the acidity that's in the sparkling sake. And when you sip the sparkling sake, it really cleanses your palate and you're ready to go for the next bite. So this is a really unique pairing. And if you're interested in supporting Panya during this time when they can't have people inside, if you want to get this to-go offer, I'm going to share my screen again, and there's a URL you can visit to take advantage of this and join us. It's sakemeetschefs.eventbrite.com. sakemeetschefs.eventbrite.com. So if you want to visit that URL, you can order the pairing. You get the sparkling sake, you get the iburigako cream cheese tart, and you get everything together, including tax and tip and gratuity, and it is all ready to go. And the dates, so you could pick that up in the New York City area, are the 18th, 19th, and 20th of September. So please consider that if you're in New York City and you'd like to try this really interesting pairing and support a local business. All right, so we're gonna move on to the Q&A portion now. And I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm gonna look at your Q&A questions. All right. See what we got here. What constitutes an atmosphere of pressure? That's a great question. So an atmosphere of pressure is at sea level, the downward pressure of the atmosphere on us. It's about 14 pounds of weight that is pushing down on us. And that's considered one atmosphere of pressure. And our sparkling sake, the Hakkaisan AWA, has 5 atmospheres of pressure. So that's 14 pounds times 5. And generally, in the world of champagne or sparkling wine, it's between 4 and 6 atmospheres of pressure. But it's good to know that that amount of pressure is behind that cork under that cage. So when you're opening sparkling wine or you're opening sparkling sake, just be aware that there's quite a bit of force behind that cork, and that's what the atmospheres of pressure is all about. If you're serving a sparkling sake in the restaurant setting, is it acceptable to place the bottle on the table in order to open it? Or is it to hold it the entire time? I think if you have a sparkling sake open, if you want to put it in an ice bucket to keep it cold, I think you can leave the sparkling sake open on the table, but you want to keep it cold, nice and cold, extra cold, because as I mentioned before, that coldness is going to keep the CO2 from escaping. Keeping the sparkling sake very well chilled is going to help those bubbles from keeping them from escaping. So you can keep it at the table, but you don't want to leave it out at room temperature getting warmer and warmer and warmer. You want to keep it in ice water, keep it nice and cold. Okay, will we be able to get the recording? Yes, so this recording is going to be available. I might edit out my bloopers, but this recording is going to be available, and we'll be posting that to the Hakkaisan website. And you'll be able to see it also on the UrbanSake website, and we'll have it available for you to review afterwards for anyone who couldn't join us tonight. So the disgorgement method for sparkling sake, it's very, very similar to sparkling wine. Usually there's a machine that has the bottle upside down, and they treat the mouth of the bottle with cold, so it gets pretty much frozen. And then they remove the existing cap that's on the bottle, and the pressure of the existing CO2 that's in the bottle forces the plug, the dead yeast, out. And then they fill in a little bit more sparkling sake from the same batch, and then they put the cork in and seal that. So very similar to what you would do with sparkling wine, but that's a quick overview again of the disgorgement process. Is sake healthier than wine? Absolutely it is. Sake has 1/3 the acidity of wine. So if you have acid reflux or problems with acidity in wine, sake is much, much lower in acidity, much higher in amino acids, and it's very pure. It's just rice and water. When you drink brown spirits or you have cocktails or things that are aged in wood, you can get, I think, a worse hangover. I've had the worst hangovers, I think, from red wine. But I think that sake is very pure, very clean. You don't want to overindulge, but I think it's a wonderful alternative if you're interested in enjoying sake, but you want something a little bit pure and a little bit cleaner. So I think it's healthier than other alcohols available. Any typical Japanese cuisine that pairs well with sparkling sake? What a good question. I love that question. So when it comes to Japanese cuisine, I've seen Japanese people in Japan drinking sparkling wine, drinking champagne with sushi and sashimi. And I think that's a little funny, but if you have a sparkling sake, this again, going back to that umami factor, this has traces of umami and those amino acids, the glutamic acids in there that are going to give us a little savory note that layers beautifully with Japanese flavors. And if you think of something like a seaweed salad or sushi, sashimi, these flavors are very classic when it comes to sparkling sake and with Japanese cuisine. I think those are wonderful ways that you could marry the two. So think about sushi and sashimi. Have the Japanese adopted the tradition of sabering bottles? So sabering a bottle is using a sword or a knife to cut off the top and send it flying. It's extremely dangerous. I've not seen it in Japan. The pressure is the same as a sparkling wine, so you could use a saber to open a bottle of sparkling. But my personal opinion is that it's too dangerous. It's not worth it. Safety first. That's my opinion as a sake samurai. I should be wielding a sword as a sake samurai, but honestly, I think that when it comes to sabering bottles, it's better left to do it the safe way so that nobody will get hurt and everyone can enjoy the sake together. Okay. Sake is typically kept upright. Do we want to do that with awa? Well, that's a very good point. Most sake is meant to be stored upright like this. You don't have a cork, but with the sparkling sake, with our awa, you do have a cork. If you were to store this for a longer period of time, you would definitely want to keep it on its side so that the moisture of the sake can be in contact with the cork so it won't dry out. But you know, sake is generally meant to be consumed relatively young. So if you buy it this season, you want to consume it this season as well. If you wanted to experiment with aging, however, you would want to lay it on its side, keep that cork from getting dried out. That's an excellent question. Let's see if we have time for one more. How is sparkling sake viewed among conservative sake people, in my opinion? Well, I think that the people who started the AWA association that I mentioned, a lot of those people are very well-known and honored members of the sake producing community, of the wonderful brewery families that have been around for generations. And this came from them. This came from the industry. So I think that premium sparkling sake is something that is definitely acknowledged, and it's in summary, I view it as a bridge product. It's a way to take a format and a shape and a form that people around the entire world will recognize. If I handed anybody in France or Germany or South America, I handed them a bottle of Hakkaisan AWA, they would see the cork, they would see the cage, they would know which glass to grab off the shelf, they would know how to open it, and they would be able to pour it and enjoy it. So the format is very traditional around the world as a sparkling product, but inside it has the heart and soul of Japanese sake. So I think, I view it as a bridge product to help bring people into the world of sake through this format, this form that they may understand. So I think in my opinion, the more conservative or more traditional parts of the sake industry are really hopeful about premium sparkling sake like the Hakkaisan Awa here as something that can be used to reach around the world and introduce more people to what we call Japanese culture in a cup, Japanese sake. All right, so I want to see if in the chat we have any final questions. How long could you store awa sake? Well, you know, as I said a moment ago, you want to drink your sake fresh. Sake should be consumed within a year after you buy it in general. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I enjoy drinking sake as fresh as possible. If you wanted to experiment with aging sake at home, you could do that, but I generally recommend leaving aging up to the brewers. They have the expertise of aging sake with the correct volume and the correct temperatures, and they can create aged products that are finely tuned. And aging at home is a little bit more of a crapshoot because you can't always control the temperature as precisely as you can in the brewery environment. So I recommend drinking your sparkling sake young, drinking all your sake young. And when it comes to aged sake, you really want to go to the aged sakes that are produced by the breweries that are aged specifically. I think you'll have a much more enjoyable experience with those. I hope that answered your question. Okay, where will the video be located? The video is going to be on UrbanSake.com and also on Hakkaisan.com. And if you want to follow our social media, I can put this up really briefly and show you quickly our social media. So we have Hakkaisan.com as our website, Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you want to follow us on any of these platforms, in the next couple days, we're going to be posting this video where you can go back and revisit the production method, the pairings, and all that. All right. And just one final reminder again, if you're in New York City and you want to try the pairing with the daikon pickle cream cheese tart and this Hakkaisan Awa, it would be a fun experiment, and you're supporting a local business, which is great. You can go to the Eventbrite link that's in the chat right now. And I want to thank all of you so much for tuning in. You had some great questions. Thanks for sticking with me through all the technical difficulties. I hope you had a chance to open the sparkling sake and that you enjoyed it. For the final toast of the evening, I just want to wish everyone a very happy evening, and we're going to do a final kanpai with our sparkling Hakkaisan Awa. Thank you all so much for joining. Here you can see my bubbles. So kanpai, everyone. Thank you for coming. Cheers. Thank you all so much. So for those of you who want, I'm going to hang out for just a couple more minutes. The lecture is officially over, but if you have any other further questions, I'm going to be remaining here in the chat for just another 5 minutes or so. So please let me know if you have any follow-up questions or anything unrelated to AWA. I'd be very happy to stay around and answer any other questions that you have. I did get one question from Laura Blackwell. When were you awarded Sake Samurai? Well, that was actually in the dark ages when they invented the wheel back in 2006. No, sorry, 2007. So I got Sake Samurai the second year it was offered. I received it in 2007. And I was one of the first non-Japanese people to receive that award. And it really changed my life. It sent me on a direction of teaching about sake, and I got more and more interested. And it was a wonderful, very momentous event in my life that sent me on the path of teaching about sake. So thank you for asking about that. Oh, there's a question about Venmo account. No, we don't need any donations. We're going to be, this is a free event. There's the American Sake Association is going to be doing an event on Sake Day. That's going to be October 1st. So if you're interested in donating to a good sake cause, the American Sake Association is going to be doing a big all-day event on October 1st, and we'll be accepting donations for affordable sake education there. And you can visit AmericanSakeAssociation.org to learn more about that if you'd like to donate to a good sake cause. So thank you for that question. Okay, how can I get into the industry? No experience, but I have some sake certificates. Not seeing a lot of sake sommelier right now being hired due to COVID. Yes, my answer last year versus this year is going to be very different. When it comes to working in the industry, I think that the sake industry has a huge, normally has a huge advantage. There's not as many trained people in the world of sake. And I think if it's something you want to get into career-wise, getting as many certifications as you can is highly recommended. And I think when the restaurant industry returns to normal, or more normal, there will be a growth in, continued growth in the Japanese sake business and also in the Japanese restaurant business. And I think in the future, there'll be a good opportunity. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in getting into the industry as a young person, to get as many certifications as you can. If you have the opportunity, I know it's not available to us right now, but in the future, if you have a chance to go to Japan and visit some restaurants and some sake breweries there, it's a wonderful way to see how things work in Japan, and I'd highly recommend that. And getting as much training as you can and networking, that's really something I would highly recommend. So good luck to you, and I hope things go really well. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Yes, and someone mentioned the Sake School of America. I teach for them, SakeSchoolOfAmerica.com, and they're a great resource for if you want to do a sake som class, or if you want to do any additional training, that's something you can do as well. It's a great place to take classes, and we're offering online classes for the first time this time due to the COVID situation. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for the extra question. I had so much fun talking to all of you. Thank you for hanging out with me. And I'm going to be home tonight finishing up my AWA. It was an absolute pleasure. Again, check us out on social media, Hakkaisan.com, or also UrbanSake.com. And we'll be posting this video if you'd like to review it and go through some of the tastings again with your own sake and your own delicious appetizers. So I look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks so much. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.